Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian president, he's gone on an official visit to the United Arab Emirates. Okay, so this is very significant. Why? Because this is his first official visit to another Arab country since the war started. And obviously, with that said, his first to the UAE. Let me show you a little bit and tell you why this matters. So you can see here some of the pictures and the videos. I'll just walk you through that first. So he's speaking here to bin Zayed of the UAE. And you can see with him, seated with him is, I think, the foreign minister. And here are some of the other pictures, official pictures that were posted. So he's standing there with Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, who's the crown prince of Abu Dhabi. And where are some of the other pictures? I think. Oh God, this tweet was funny. I'll get to that in a moment. But in any case, people are outraged. They're very upset at this, right? And one of the people who's outraged is none other than this very fine individual. Look at this. It's Charles Lister, right? So he says, I'm speechless. Bashar al-Assad is in Dubai on a quote-unquote brotherly state visit to the United Arab Emirates. So just to tell you who Charles Lister is, he's basically an Al-Qaeda apologist. You know, he was I can give you a direct quote. He was saying, like, in Syria, Al-Qaeda have really got it right. So, you know, this is the kind of people we're dealing with here. You know, they support the coup in Syria. They support the regime change project in Syria. And they've tried softening the image of these terrorists, the foreign-backed terrorists. And, you know, really just trying to... I mean, when you say Al-Qaeda have really got it right in Syria, it sounds like you're rehabilitating Al-Qaeda to me. That's my impression. That's the impression that you give me, and it's not a very good one, is it? It's not. That doesn't very sound good. That doesn't sound very good, to be honest. And he's very upset about this, right? He says he's speechless. Of course, he's upset because this guy is one of the people who has been pushing for the government in Syria to be couped, to be to be iced and offed. So. Of course, he's very upset because when you see the Syrian president visiting a country like the UAE, which, I mean, let's be honest here, when Syria was down, they were kicking Syria, you know? Qatar and Saudi Arabia were funding a lot of these terrorist groups in Syria, you know? And the UAE, they turned their back on Syria. I mean, almost every Arab country turned their back on Syria, really. And when you look at what their geopolitics are, it shouldn't surprise you. Jordan, for example, they just recently opened a border crossing with Syria. The Jordanian king had a call with Bashar al-Assad a few months ago. So that's also, again, it's showing you that there's some sort of détente, there's a rapprochement. The Syrian government growing closer to its neighbors and or other countries. And why is that important? Because, again, these countries turn their back on Syria. So that means that they realize that the Syrian government isn't going anywhere. The regime change project failed. And so they have no choice now but to reestablish ties, to normalize ties with Syria. And again, when I say reestablish, I'm not saying they cut off ties. So perhaps it's not the best word. But, you know, as we say in geopolitics, it's a rapprochement. And so that's what's going on here. And Jordan, a few months ago, as I said, the king called Bashar al-Assad, the first time they've spoken in like 10 years since the war began. And, there's, of course, this idea of having gas delivered, power delivered to Lebanon through Jordan and, using Egyptian gas as well. And that would go through Syria. So that's another way that you see Syria is kind of, benefiting from a rapprochement with not just Jordan, but also from Syria. And, of course, the Emiratis had also reestablished contact with Syria, but now this is the first official visit. So again, why is this significant? Because it shows that the West and its allies in the region were not able to get rid of Bashar al-Assad, to get rid of his government and overthrow him. They've been trying for many, many years, since 2011, and it failed. And I know, people, they don't want to face this reality. They think, oh, it's just a revolution. It's a civil war. It's a people's uprising. yeah, if you're an idiot, like, you know, you got Turkey, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the UK, US, France, Germany, the EU, the United States, all these countries trying to get rid of a government, and you're going to come here and tell me it's a civil war? It's anything but a civil war. There are too many signs, not signs, there's too much evidence to the contrary. Now here's CNN with their take on this. Let's have a look.
Yeah, and as the Russian invasion of Ukraine, quite frankly, dominates the headlines, so there is an awful lot going on behind the scenes in this region, not least this visit. But also there is a prism through which this region, of course, is seeing the wider story that is so prescient in the headlines at present. The Emirati Foreign Minister, Abdullah bin Zayed, in Moscow last week, meeting with his Russian counterpart. Now, as I understand it, they discussed bringing Syria back into the fold, as well as oil production. What is the Moscow lens here in the UAE at present, and what's the significance?
Well, we have a good relationship with Russia. Not only we, but I'm talking about the Arab Gulf states too. And most of it centers around energy, oil market, and oil demand. And we are part of the OPEC Plus. And the deal on oil is always important to Russia, to UAE, to major oil producers. And I think the visit probably has gone to clarify the fact that we are not on our own when it comes to oil market. We have to discuss any increase in production with the key partners, and one of the key partners, of course, Russia. This is for the stability of the oil market. Without it, probably we're going to have, a wild oil market. So I think that is one of the important aspect to this visit by Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed. But I think we also have in mind also a role, a mediator of a sort, to maybe come and play some kind of a calming down the tension between Ukraine and Russia. We are in a good position to do that, although we're not asked to do it, but we are offering that kind of a role. We have an excellent relationship with Russia, a good relationship with Ukraine. So maybe this falls into that, Becky. And I think immediately after Sheikh Abdullah came back, he was on the phone calling the foreign minister of Ukraine to brief him on this. So this is something also in the making. Hopefully we will be in a position to mediate between these two war
and certainly there have been consistent calls for de-escalation.
So of course they're not happy about Syria being brought back into the fold. I wanted to show you something else over here. Saudi Arabia, which, I mean, Saudi Arabia did a lot worse than the UAE. Saudi Arabia was like really actively trying to overthrow the Syrian government. Again, just like Turkey, just like the United States. They're funding a bunch of groups. I've lost count. And I don't need to tell you, of course, that Saudi Arabia, since many decades, has been exporting Wahhabism. They've tried doing this in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, in that region. Of course, that's how they helped to give rise to Al-Qaeda. And of course, the United States turns a blind eye because they want, in part, these groups to help them achieve their foreign policy objectives. At the time, that meant fighting the Soviets. But also because they have no choice, in a sense. They need Saudi oil. They need Saudi Arabia to help them prop up the petrodollar, because the United States dollar is pegged to Saudi Arabia, exclusively selling oil in US dollars. So, but just to show you the shift in attitude, this is from last year, and we talked about this on the channel. Saudi Arabia was in rapprochement talks with Syria. They've actually also been doing that with Iran, but that's a separate issue. But you can see from Al Jazeera, they say after years of conflict, Riyadh, which is the Saudi Arabian capital, Riyadh now views Damascus as an expedient avenue to shore up broader regional interests. Okay? And so they say here that Saudi Arabia is close to reaching an agreement on diplomatic normalization with President Bashar al-Assad's government as Riyadh jockeys to play a lead role in removing the Iranian presence from Syria. So they want something. That's, of course, what they want. But my point is that you have so many countries, Arab countries, showing that Yep, Bashar al-Assad's not going anywhere, so we better reestablish ties because it's in our benefit as well to have a strong regional partner. And you're seeing that from Jordan, you're seeing that from Egypt, you're seeing that from the Saudis, and now the UAE. And speaking of bin Zayed, who again is the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, of the UAE, who Bashar al-Assad was meeting with just now, I wanted to show you something because you guys remember I'm covering the Julian Assange case, and when the extradition hearing started in London at the Old Bailey, the Assange protesters, they erected a giant figure of bin Zayed with these devil horns and blood on his hands, and people were throwing shoes at the goddamn inflatable. And you know why they were doing this? Again, because this was September, October 2020. The reason people were doing this is because the UAE normalized ties with Israel. Again, Israel is illegally occupying the Golan Heights in Syria since 1967. It's occupying Shebaa farms in Lebanon, and of course, Palestine. And so the fact that you have an Arab country accepting an occupier like Israel, not just any occupier, but an occupier of Arab lands and and holy lands, because again, Jerusalem is important for Jews, Christians, and Muslims. That's a stab in the back. There is no question about it. That is a stab in the back. The UAE is actually 80% foreigners. It's not even a real country in many ways. Seriously, 80% of the population in the UAE are not Arabs. They're foreigners because they're rich people who go there to buy houses. It's got a very big airport, important airport. Business investments. It's really just an economic hub. It's not really, So that's one thing, but it wasn't just the UAE, it was Bahrain. Bahrain actually has an Arab population, a majority Arab population. And I can tell you one thing, the people there are furious about this. Jordan and Egypt have ties with Israel. And again, most Jordanians and Egyptians are furious about that. Again, that's an older story, but in 2020, when you had the Abraham Accords, Trump, he basically got the Emiratis, the UAE, and he got the Bahrainis to sit down and sign these so-called Abraham Accords with the Israelis and then recognize Israel and establish ties. And that's a stab in the back. And that's why people with Assange, they put up this, not Assange's team, I'm saying Assange supporters, they put up this inflatable with blood on his hands because he established ties with Israel. I just wanted to give you a little bit of that context because I can tell you one thing. I'm not joking. I can guarantee you there's a good chunk of Syrians who are not happy about Assad meeting with the UAE, specifically because of this, because the UAE normalized ties with Israel. Because again, that's a stab in the back to the Palestinians and it's a stab in the back to the Syrians. Israel is occupying Syrian land. So that it's, especially as an Arab country, because, Russia is a strong Syrian ally, but Russia is also a strong ally of Israel. Actually, Russia was the first country in the world to recognize Israel. They're the first to do it immediately. Again, a lot of Israelis are actually Russian Jews. So that's a separate issue. Syria needs Russia. The only reason the Syrian government is still alive, actually, I should rephrase that. The only reason Syria exists as Syria, again, they've destroyed it, but the only reason it exists is in part thanks to Russia. But with the Emiratis, these are Arabs. These are neighbors. And they go off and just accept the Israelis like that. Many Syrians and Arabs view that as a stab in the back. There's no question about that. And I can guarantee you some of them are not happy about this because, it's like, why are you dealing with this guy who stabbed us in the back, who stabbed the Palestinians in the back? But that's another issue. Why this is important? This is important because Syria is re-emerging from the regime change project. It failed. They were not successful like in Libya. They were not successful like in Iraq. Syria survived because of Russia, Hezbollah, and Iran. And again, Syria has a lot of reconstruction. It has a long road ahead to be rebuilt, inshallah. But it's good when your neighbors, they stop giving you the cold shoulder. Let's put it that way.